Hi everyone, my name is Stefan Abrams. I am a chapter lead of Team Enough California. I also participate in the Team Enough California Lobby Collective as well as a small group lead. And why I do gun violence prevention work, mainly is because I would never want to see any gun violence happen in my community or to anyone who's very close to me. And also at my very first Brady conference, Maddie Scott gave a speech, and afterwards she told all the youth activists to keep doing this work for her. And that's something that I always remember, is because she doesn't want any other mother to feel the pain that she's gone through. And I thought that was really inspiring.
Hello, my name is Nikki Smith, and I'm from Stockton, California. I am motivated to be a member of the gun violence prevention movement because of all the tragic deaths and needless loss of lives. You see this list that I am holding. You all know the names of these places where horrific tragedies occurred. These were senseless murders of innocent victims. It didn't have to happen. And here, I have a few clips from our local newspaper. Every week, there are reports of homicides, murders, shootings, drive-by shootings, and weapons confiscations. Our families, our children, our community shouldn't have to live under these conditions. It needs to change. It needs to change now. And it will only change when we all use our voices to make that change happen.
Hello, my name is RJ Harrison, and I'm the brother of Rashad Williams. And the reason why I'm giving you this video is because I lost my brother to gun violence, and it's other people around the world that have lost their loved ones to gun violence. And I just wanted to stop. Enough is enough.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So welcome everyone. We're all involved with Team Enough, and we're just going to be doing a lobbying 101 and voter access training. So Matt, if you want to start our PowerPoint presentation. Amazing. So lobbying 101. So just to kind of introduce ourselves. Hi, my name is Ritika Iyer. I'm 20 years old and I'm a junior at George Washington University, but I'm originally from Southern California. I am currently on the Team Enough Executive Council, and I'm also one of the National Youth Lobbying Coordinators. And I'll let the rest of our panel introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Adam Friedman. I'm also a current junior at the George Washington University. I'm another one of our co-leads for our National Lobbying Collective initiative. And I'm also a co-founder of Team Enough and the executive council member.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Ivan Garcia. Unlike Ritika and Adam, I am a senior in high school this year, so I'm getting ready to go. I'm one of the co-leads for the California Lobby Collective. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And I just saw we went to the next slide. All right, so we're just going to kick it off. This is going to be an intro to lobbying, and we're going to go through some specifics. We just want to start off by defining what lobbying is. So in its most basic form, lobbying is the act of trying to influence a politician, someone who's in elected office, on a specific issue. In our case, a lot of times we're lobbying for gun violence prevention bills and different measures to stop more killings from gun violence. Importantly, anyone can lobby Congress and the California legislature and any state. And so this is an important distinction because there are skills to lobbying, but any single person in America has the ability to walk into a senator's office. And while they might not get to meet with their senator, they have the opportunity to have their voice heard by someone who's in that office. And there are many different reasons why you might choose lobbying as your method. As young people, we have two big reasons for choosing lobbying. The first one is that it makes the issue personal because we're presenting facts and we're also telling stories. So it's much more personal. We're making those connections and we're learning a lot along the way as well. It also shows a lot of passion and solidarity for the issue, and it just shows the magnitude of the issue. When you see all of us young people walking through the Capitol, you can really see how many people are really vouching for this issue.
So to kind of give a little background on kind of the history of gun violence prevention lobbying. So actually prior to, our best friend, the NRA, it was actually pretty fairly easy to pass gun violence prevention legislation. For example, the 1934 National Firearms Act, which helped impose a tax on the making and transfer of firearms. The 1968 Gun Control Act, which helped create categories for prohibited people. So basically prevented people from owning firearms if they're especially regulating across interstate lines. And then the 1993 Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act, which required a background check on purchases for licensed firearms and also created the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. All great things, which was actually fairly easy, not fairly easy, but institute, get it through Congress and be able to institute nationally. And then the NRA lobby entered. In 1997, the NRA had an annual meeting, which is now referred to as the Cincinnati Revolt, where a change in leadership shifted focus away from the hunting and gun safety, which was the original intent of the NRA, and then shifted it to more engaging in political debate around guns and became more of a powerhouse in being a super PAC, and then donating a lot of money to various congressional and state senators and members to unfortunately block a lot of these gun control measures or gun legislation. So one of the biggest people in that was the former NRA lobbyist, Chris Cox. He was the executive director of the NRA's Institute for Legislative Action. And at its peak, the NRA spent about $3.3 million to lobby against gun control legislation. So you can definitely a big priority for them. But enter the Team Enough Youth Lobbying Collective.
So, thank you, Ritika. Like Ritika just said, for years and years in this country, we've had comprehensive gun violence prevention laws being passed. And really in the past 30 years, we've seen that change, right? The Brady bill that our own organization pushed for and got passed was taken down. And in the 16 years since then, we've seen drastic increases, not only in gun violence, but the types of gun used in instances of shootings. And so with that, our understanding of the issue has also gotten a lot deeper because we've had to really look at the root causes of gun violence and understanding that it's often hard to push limitations or specific bills that aim to limit people's access who might be in a moment of crisis or shouldn't own firearms through federal Congress. What we've been able to do instead is think more about, again, these root causes of gun violence and really pursue that as part of our legislative agenda, understanding that the push for things like banning assault weapons is always happening, right? It's perpetual. So a few things that we just wanted to touch on briefly to help contextualize our work and the work that's being done in the GVP space around lobbying specifically. First, we just wanted to mention CDC funding. I'm sure many of you remember how recently we were able to address that issue. But since 1996, the CDC has not essentially spent money into any sort of gun violence prevention research beyond just the number of gun homicides in America, and some statistics around how people died. But really, it's been very limited. And this is actually the first year since 1996 when that money has been returned to the budget. In addition to that, we've supported violence intervention funding at the state and federal level, which typically looks like some sort of grant system for specific local intervention programs, or some sort of training like a federal bill we're pushing for now, which ensures that folks who don't work in law enforcement, don't necessarily work for the government, but are deeply involved in their communities can have that sort of de-escalation training. And then we've also pushed for additional solutions like extreme risk protection orders or ERPOs, and also repealing PLCA, which is a pretty notorious piece of legislation essentially designed to protect gun dealers and gun manufacturers from facing any sort of legal ramifications when a firearm that they either sold or manufactured was used in some sort of shooting or suicide. So hopefully this contextualizes more of the bills we'll be talking about over the next few minutes here. And now we're going to go to a short video.
Whew, you sure gotta climb a lot of steps to get to this Capitol building here in Washington. Well, I wonder who that sad little scrap of paper is.
I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee, but I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will, but today I am still just a bill.
Gee, Bill, you certainly have a lot of patience and courage.
Well, I got this far. When I started, I wasn't even a bill. I was just an idea. Some folks back home decided they wanted a law passed, so they called their local congressman, and he said, "You're right, there ought to be a law." Then he sat down and wrote me out and introduced me to Congress, and I became a bill. And I'll remain a bill until they decide to make me a law. I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I got as far as Capitol Hill. Well, now I'm stuck in committee, and I'll sit here and wait while a few key congressmen discuss and debate whether they should let me be a law. I hope and pray that they will, but today I am still just a bill.
Listen to those congressmen arguing. Is all that discussion and debate about you?
Yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones. Most bills never even get this far. I hope they decide to report on me favorably, otherwise I may die.
Die?
Yeah, die in committee. Oh, but it looks like I'm going to live. Now I go to the House of Representatives and they vote on me.
If they vote yes, what happens?
Then I go to the Senate and the whole thing starts all over again.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And if they vote for me on Capitol Hill, well, then I'm off to the White House where I'll wait in a line with a lot of other bills for the president to sign. And if he signs me, then I'll be a law. How I hope and pray that he will. But today I am still just a bill.
You mean even if the whole Congress says you should be a law, the president can still say no?
Yes, that's called a veto. If the president vetoes me, I have to go back to Congress and they vote on me again, and by that time you're so
By
old.
that time, it's very unlikely that you become a law. It's not easy to become a law, is it?
No, but how I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
He signed your bill. Now you're a law.
Oh, yes.
That video is always amazing to watch. It's amazing. And I just wanted to say before we get started also, if you all have any questions, you can submit them through the Q&A tool, and we will be answering those at the very end. Forgot to say that. So now we just want to give some overview into what lobbying actually looks like in practice. And on the next slide, Ritika is going to go into what a meeting actually looks like. But here are some tips that we have designed and that are also just very commonly known. So the first one is to make your message memorable and really personalize your story. So typically there will be different roles when you're lobbying in a group, and the person who is telling a personal story, sometimes it's more than one person, and sometimes everyone has a personal story. It just depends on different scenarios. You really want to personalize your story and make it very compelling. You also need to leave behind different information. We call these one-pagers often. Sometimes you're giving out business cards, and you're usually leaving these with staffers in different offices. And so these are just for people to really be able to look at your information of your organization, be able to go to your website, be able to find out more on this one pager, as we say, and just be able to get an overview of what we're doing and why we're doing it. It also gives them an opportunity to ever, if they're ever working on a piece of legislation and, they remember meeting with this specific group, they have our information and they can easily get it. There's also, we're young people when we lobby, right? And there are some pros and cons to that. I think we can get more into some detail into the very end when we reflect on our personal reflections with that. And then there's different approaches that are, they're based on different desired results. There's so many different ways to lobby, and there are many different methods of doing it. And so they all just depend on what your desired outcome is. And then the biggest thing that I probably would emphasize is preparing beforehand. So making sure that you do research on any elected official that you're visiting. You don't want to stumble into their office and, they say, well, actually, I voted on this. And you're like, oh, you did? Like you just want to make sure that you are very much prepared beforehand. You are taking notes during the meeting. And then you are prepared before and during the meeting. And when you're doing your research, you also very much want to be informed on the common misconceptions. And the best thing you can always do is anticipate their pushback, because many times you will face pushback, if not all the time. And you need to be ready for how you're going to come back. And then you can look at congressional context and information at congress.gov, and there's more information for specific states. So there's many different ways to prepare, and I think we can share more about that in our personal reflections as well.
Thank you, Ivan. I think that's a really important context to understand when we're entering into a meeting, right? That preparation is so much of our work. And there's this whole other facet of an actual lobbying meeting, which happens just in the few moments you're in a room or in a virtual room with a representative. Now, something that's important to remember is these meetings can be anywhere from 5 minutes to half an hour, right? And you can be prepared for whatever that looks like, but there are so many factors we can't control, like how much a staffer or elected official will speak, what kind of questions they'll ask us, things like that. So ultimately, again, the idea of preparing and trying to know as much about the representative or whatever kind of elected official you're lobbying's record, and really be ready with the information you're lobbying for is essential. When we actually get into that space, the first thing you always want to do is introduce yourself, introduce the folks you're with, and really talk about why you're there, right? This isn't the time specifically for the legislation that you're working on, but it's about not, in a way, justifying and contextualizing who you are, what you're doing in that office, and what you're about to talk about. One thing that's really important to mention as well is if you're a constituent of that elected official's district or region in whatever state or smaller jurisdiction you're a part of, important to mention that. And then after that, typically folks will get into that bill discussion. So I always recommend to mention all of the legislation that you're going to be speaking about at the beginning of the meeting. So the staffer, whoever is meeting with you, will have a little time to reference their notes, get their information out, because they want to have a conversation with you. And once you get into the actual bill discussion itself, some things that folks will do first are share a personal anecdote if someone has one that's directly connected to a piece of legislation, or if there isn't something as tangible for you, it's always important to share some statistics, but really ensure that you're grounding the conversation in either lived experience, the statistics and reality for a lot of Americans around the country, or a combination of the two. And as you get into the actual text of the bill, again, you'll probably have a copy or a PDF to share with the person you're meeting with. It's great to just go and hit some of those important points on the one pager you're provided with, or whatever kind of document you're using, about why this bill is important and why this, specifically why this elected official should be voting for it. Because we look at a lot of important legislation that we want to pass, and ultimately the key with lobbying is figuring out exactly why that elected official hasn't supported it yet, and trying to make that perfect case for why they should. So of course, checking in for questions, you want to go back or go to your next category, which is all about the ask, right? This is where you convey to this elected official or the person who's in their office that you're asking that elected official to sign on to this bill. You want their support on it, and that's what you're asking of them. So first, again, you want to contextualize that, right? Reiterate why you're there. Sometimes you might be in a friendly office and you're just thanking them for their continued support of your agenda, asking them for some advice in future offices with maybe less friendly elected officials, right? But if you're going to an office where someone is against this policy or hasn't voted on it yet, you want to create a situation where you can have a conversation about it and ultimately make it known that you are someone who votes for whoever this person is, and you as a constituent want to ensure that their agenda is reflecting your values, right? And we have a lot of power in that sense, because ultimately these elected officials should be working for us. And then of course, you'll finish up your meeting by leaving behind a one pager, a business card saying thank you, and going on to the next one of your day.
So next slide, please. So obviously in the era of COVID-19, a lot of these meetings are changing. You know, we're no longer able to actually go to the state capitol or the nation's capital and actually lobby physically. So all our meetings are now online. So we definitely have, so as I think we've all kind of mentioned, we're all part of a lobbying collective. So all the lobbying collectives will be completely virtual. So a lot of these tactics, we're gonna have to sort of adapt and kind of figure out how we're gonna make it productive and very much persuasive in a virtual setting. So one of the biggest things that we found is that we want to really frame how GDP is affected by COVID-19. In this past, when I want to say maybe like May-ish, we had a virtual lobbying day with our DC collective. They were actually able to successfully lobby various offices virtually from the comfort of your own home. I was in Southern California virtually lobbying a staffer that might have been across the country. And it was very empowering, but it was also interesting because when we talk about gun violence, we never really kind of bring up how much it is related to us like staying home. So in that same lobby day, we lobbied for Ethan's Law, which if you're not aware, is related to safe storage. And especially in this time when everyone's staying home, and if there's a gun in the household, if it's not properly, you know, if not properly stored and contained, then someone, you know, a minor or an individual who shouldn't own a gun might gain access to it. So really kind of framing how important this is, especially in COVID, is important. In another instance, we were also lobbying for S-120, which is Protecting Domestic Violence and Stalking Victims Act. Domestic violence is on the rise, especially since everyone is home. We're seeing an uptick in number of people who are calling police because there's domestic violence going on in their household. So kind of framing how you know, this issue is very much impacted by all of us staying home is very important, especially when we're doing it virtually. So as it says, like look into how it is possible virtually. We use Zoom and it actually worked very well. No real problems there. So kind of making sure we work with the offices and, you know, saying that, you know, we understand this is virtual. We want to make this as smooth as possible. And then also acknowledging that, you know, there are advocates in their own communities, there are violence interrupters, but a lot of times because of COVID, those individuals aren't able to actually reach the community in which they're supposed to help. Unfortunately, you know, with everything getting shut down, those community-based organizations were also shut down. So kind of emphasizing it to different offices that like all these resources that we thought were available are actually not even in service during this time. So really kind of emphasizing how much of our lives have changed and how much all these preventative measures have been in place to prevent gun violence are no longer there because we're all staying home. And then again, focusing on that relation building. I think maybe you guys have found in your virtual meetings that we're seeing each other's homes, you know, we're kind of getting a lot more personal, you know, dogs are coming onto meetings. So it's a lot more personal, these meetings. So kind of, and especially with offices that already agree with their stances, kind of making it, working more on that relationship and working more on, you know, kind of understanding each other, saying, okay, here, I'm bringing these bills to you. How can, you know, make it more of a symbiotic relationship? What can we do to help you? What can they do to help us? Kind of, so really working on those relationships. And over communicating, especially, is a huge thing. Those one pagers were really helpful, and kind of making sure you're giving them all the information they could possibly want, and giving them to it also in a kind of physical setting. If you would like to go into the next one. So, lobbying etiquette. So as youth, lobbying has its pros and cons. One of the pros is the fact that, especially in our lobbying collective, we come across as very professional and very much put together, which a lot of offices don't actually expect. They don't expect us to know what we're talking about. They don't expect us to have all the answers to their questions regarding legislation, but we do. So definitely using that youth to our advantage, showing that yes, we might be young, but we have it together, and being polite, and not only what we're saying but also what we're wearing is really important. And I guess during COVID, it's more like, you know, business on the top and pajamas on the bottom, but you know, they can see us looking professional. That's all that matters. So really kind of using our advantages as youth, but also because we have, you know, a lot of individuals in our collective spaces have even experienced gun violence. So making sure we empower them and giving them a great platform is important, and looking professional and making sure we're presenting ourselves professionally when we're meeting these offices. So we're not only representing Team Enough and Brady, but we're representing the gun violence prevention movement as a whole. So making sure that we're dressing and acting appropriately.
Yeah, and just for some background on what the lobby collectives are, you know, I think Team Enough is in a really unique position here because we've decided to run with the lobby method, and we've embraced the lobby method, and we actually have these programs to teach young folks all around the nation how to lobby. So as you can see, we're empowering students across the country to be advocates within their own states. And we do this by the lobby collectives. We have them in Virginia, California, Washington, DC, and Florida. So there's a good mix all over the place, and it's going to continue to expand, we hope. And so throughout each of these collectives, it's a really robust program. So we are not only teaching people how to lobby and doing lobby one-on-one presentations, we are bringing in experts from the field. We are talking to people who have lobbied before for decades, and picking their brain about best practices and what works and what doesn't. And then really importantly, we are also really emphasizing the intersections of gun violence. We understand that it's important to learn how to lobby, and we also know that it's very important that we are well educated in the different ways that gun violence affects different people. So for example, I am one of the two people who run the California Collective, and we have different webinars. The different webinars that we have this semester, we are doing one on, tomorrow we're doing one on communities of color and gun violence, and how communities of color are disproportionately affected by gun violence. We have faith-based webinars. We have LGBTQ plus webinars. And so we are just bringing in experts from the field and teaching our cohorts of young people in our state about what gun violence looks like in these different communities. And that's how we believe we can create meaningful change. And then we have lobby days, and this year they're going to be virtual, like Ritika said, and that's our legislative action. So, you know, shameless plug here also, we are we're recruiting for, we're going to start looking for applications for the, you know, spring semester in the coming months. So, you know, check out Team Enough and apply if you're at all interested, if you're a young person and want to learn how to lobby and also learn about the intersections of gun violence.
Go ahead.
So here we wanted to dedicate some time in our presentation to answer some more abstract questions, because I think oftentimes we go into our activism, we go into gun violence prevention work with an answer in mind for why we do the work and what we want to get out of it. And I think ultimately for ourselves, the answers to those questions are vital, right? They are why we continue to do the work as people. And when we enter into these organizational structures, when we're doing lobbying work specifically, I think it's important for us to be more flexible with our definitions of success. So we wanted the whole time to chat about how that definition has evolved for each of us, and the different ways we continue to look for our own feelings of success.
So on that note, I thought I'd just kind of reflect on some of the meetings that I've had that I would consider successes. I remember, oh, I can't remember when, but me and a couple of other students had a meeting with Senator Angus King. He's an independent from Maine, I believe. I will double check that to confirm. But he's an independent from Maine. And it was interesting, the conversation we had. We were lobbying for the assault weapons ban. And since he hadn't signed on to it quite yet, so it was more like a kind of convincing him, really trying to have like a constructive conversation. And the reason why I consider it a success is because we sat down and actually had a conversation. Like, he asked us questions about the bill, asked us why it was important to, not him specifically, but a staffer. So the fact that they were willing to engage with us on a conversation and really kind of understand our perspective made me feel like it was a win. I don't believe he ended up signing on to said bill. But again, as Adam said, what success looks like varies very much from person to person. And from like the meetings itself, because it's hard to go into such complex meetings thinking that we're going to get a sign on. Sometimes it happens. Congressman Ted Deutsch is amazing, and usually that's what happens when we go into his office. If we're talking about a bill that he's not necessarily signed on to. There's been instances where we'd have lobbied his office in the morning, and by the evening, if we check congress.gov, he's already signed on. So that's definitely like a huge win, and it feels great. But unfortunately, not all meetings are like that. One of our collective groups in the DC collective actually had like an hour-long meeting with Ted Cruz's office, and they viewed that as a win because, again, in an office that's usually not so friendly to gun violence prevention legislation, but was willing to engage in such a long conversation, it felt like a win. It felt like, they're actually, wanting to listen to us youth and wanting to hear what we've learned and our perspectives. So it definitely does change with what we regard as success. Ivan, if you want to share anything that you might have, your experiences with success in this.
Yeah, I think you summed up a lot of great things that I was thinking as well. I think this question, like you said, varies a whole lot. It feels like so long since I have last lobbied. But the couple times that I did lobby, they were in California and they were in the Capitol in Sacramento. And I lobbied with a different group, and then I lobbied with TMNF as well. And so I think it varies, first of all, on political affiliation. Many times we make it a point to meet with both sides of the aisle and not make that a barrier. And so I remember meeting with an assemblywoman, I believe, and we met with her staffer both times. And I think it was 2 different years in a row. And I don't think he remembered me, but I remembered him. And so I think, in those scenarios, like Ritika said, like getting into Ted Cruz's office, getting into these offices that, you wouldn't necessarily anticipate you would schedule a meeting with. For me, that's a huge win. Going in two times every year. I mean, going in once every year is huge. And, knowing that staffer is listening to you and getting your point of view and not giving up on that is a huge success in my eyes. Sometimes, depending on how lenient whoever you're meeting with is, maybe you are interested in talking about actually introducing a bill or having them co-sponsor a bill, which is an entire other definition of success, right? And so there are different ways to be successful in this, I think. And I think it varies on the outcome you're looking for as well.
Definitely. So on that note, unless anyone else has anything to add, if you have any questions for us, I believe there's some in the chat that we're gonna take a look at. Yeah, so someone asked, I believe the deadline to join the California lobby passed. Is there a way to still be part of it? Ivan, I think you're the perfect person to answer that question.
Yeah. So we run 2 programs per semester. So currently we are in the sorry, my numbers all, I saw Adam shake his head. not two programs per semester, 1 program per semester. And so we're currently in our fall collective right now, which will take us all the way until December. And then at that point, we will start thinking about releasing applications again for the spring semester. So applications for the fall semester are closed right now. But if you stay in the loop and you keep checking back, around December, January, you can apply for the spring semester.
I also see another question here asking about the gun violence in communities of color event tomorrow and where the link is for that. One thing I will say is we do have a number of collectives across the country. Typically, our meetings are private and they're limited to the folks who have been accepted into the collective. And the primary reason is because we have a lot of youth activists that are minors, and we want to make sure that their information and video and all that is private. However, we do have some collectives who will host open events occasionally. And if that's the case, then you'll see a sign up link circulate for that. So continue to check Team Enough social media, Brady social media, because generally they'll be amplifying any sort of open webinar we have, and we really encourage y'all to join them.
So I believe Maddie Scott asked, how can we get this information to Black and Brown students who are most affected by gun violence? So a lot of times when our initial outreach goes out, so each collective kind of has been working this entire summer to outreach to various people in the community. So one of the things that a lot of the collectives we're focusing on is really trying to make sure we include everyone's voice. So really reaching out to Black and Brown communities, especially. So that's something that each of our collective, Ivan did it, and a lot of our other program leads did in each of their respective kind of cohorts. They all tried to make sure they reached out to those communities, and whether a leader in their community or schools, and really tried to make this as inclusive as a process as possible. So I hope that answers your question.
One thing I'll add too is I think there's this idea that we often have around conveying, the information we have to folks who are most affected. And I think one thing that's important to remember and use in our approaches is to center our work in, the lived experience and understanding of folks who are most affected. So, for example, one thing we try to do with the collective is specifically have folks be a part of the collective and speak on our collective calls as presenters who have this lived experience. And we've worked, like Ritika said, pretty hard over the course of the past few years to develop those connections and relationships. And I think ultimately that's the right way to do it, right? By authentically connecting with folks, because the both of you are engaged in this work and intend to be a part of it for a significant period of time, right? Pursuing these solutions that you both hold to be the right course of action, I think is really the key to developing those long relationships. And there ultimately isn't really a shortcut. It's just about reaching out to folks who are doing this work too, and building up a network of people who want to take action. And what I will say is, if there are folks who are interested in learning more about our programs, we also have our website, teamenough.org, where we have our own tab for the lobbying collective. So I encourage you all to check that out too.
Yeah, and I will just, sorry, I'm just gonna add one quick thing. Yeah, I just want to say that it's we highly do outreach to communities that have been most affected, to get applications from them, and we also really incorporate these bigger ideas and thinking about the way that we frame gun violence in the program. So it's multifaceted. It's two parts. So we actually do the research to these we do the outreach to these communities, and we make sure that we're framing this issue in a way that is equitable and it really conveys all of the viewpoints.
And just to kind of piggyback off of that, if you're in a state, if you're not in California, you're in a state that we haven't mentioned that doesn't have a youth collective, reach out to Adam or I. We would love to start a collective in your state, because we really want to make sure that we're involved in the state level of whatever state wants to have us, because empowering youth to lobby their own congressional people, either in the state or federal level, is so important and so powerful. Just to kind of wrap up, like the first time I ever lobbied, it was really surreal to just kind of sit in front of a staffer and just just be honest about what I thought and what I thought, what legislation I thought was important that needs to be enacted. So the fact that it felt that I had, members of Congress listening to me just felt really empowering is the best word to use. So if you know individuals who would be perfect for the program, please send them our way. If they want to start it in their own state, we're more than excited to do that.
You can continue dropping any sort of question you might have about Lobbying 101, any of the work that we're doing as Team Enough or through the lobbying collectives in the chat if you're on Zoom, or in the comments feature on Facebook Live. One thing that we do want to mention as well is that Ritika and I will be leading a phone bank for the state of Ohio right after this at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 Pacific, and the link to access that is through the event page. You can just go ahead and sign up right now. So if any of y'all have not signed up for that, we would love to have you on. We will be making a whole lot of calls. I think we have 1,100 phone numbers to get through. So we have our work cut out for us, but we'd love to see y'all on there too.
Thank you so much for joining.
And to anyone else who would like to join the phone banking event after this, we just posted the link in the chat. So feel free to join starting in about 5 minutes. Thank you.